Has that poor old hag finally kicked the bucket? I glared at the man, annoyed by his words. My ex-husband, who ran off with his mistress, leaving his blind mother behind. It was hard to believe he was the son of that once kind-hearted woman. His crude remarks brought my anger to its boiling point. You must have had it rough, huh? Well, now you're free. But, come on, someone your age, there's only so much freedom you can enjoy, right? His obnoxious laughter echoed as I smiled sweetly, hiding my fury. Yeah, I got the $3 million inheritance. So I'll be living freely from now on. The smile vanished from my ex-husband's face. Little did he know, soon he'd be on his knees begging for my forgiveness. My name is Emily. I'm 63 years old. I got married young and ended up living with my in-laws. They were kind people, but my husband was a disappointment. We divorced 10 years ago when I was 53. At that time, our eldest daughter, Mia, was 18, and our son, John, was 15, right when education costs were the highest. On top of that, my mother-in-law was blind. Taking care of the kids and my mother-in-law was far from easy. I met my husband, Tom, at work. I was 18 when I joined the company, and he was 24, 2 years out of college. He was older than me and seemed reliable, so I admired him. Tom was always looking after me when I was still inexperienced, and he had a caring nature. Despite being popular, for some reason, he took a liking to me and asked me out. When we got engaged, I visited his parents for the first time. His father had trouble walking, and his mother was blind. I was deeply moved, seeing how Tom supported them while managing his job. However, my own parents were against the marriage. They were worried that marrying into a family with obvious caregiving responsibilities would be too much for me. But Tom's parents were such wonderful people, and I was still young. I ignored my parents' concerns and went ahead with the marriage. My parents were so angry that they cut ties with me, but by then, I had a new family. When you're young, you feel invincible. Nothing seemed scary at the time. After we got married, I quit my job. I took it upon myself to care for my in-laws and manage the household, so that my husband could focus on his work. My in-laws were so grateful to me and treated me like their own daughter. They always expressed their thanks and never forgot to show their concern for me. Spending so much time with them made caregiving challenging, but it wasn't a burden. My husband worked late every day, and I believed everything was going well in our home. One day, I ran into an old colleague from work while coming back from the grocery store. Naturally, the conversation turned to my husband and me. My colleague said, "Tom is such a great husband. He always leaves work early because he says you're having a hard time. He's really something, isn't he?" I couldn't believe my ears. Tom never came home before 10 p.m. That was hardly early. It had to be some sort of mistake. Still, I couldn't say anything at the time. So I awkwardly smiled and replied, "Yes, that's right." Later that evening, I mentioned it to my husband, intending to test him a little. "You've been coming home late a lot lately. Couldn't you come back earlier? Your dad seems to feel bad about having me, a woman, help him with everything. At least you could help him with his bath." But before I could finish, Tom yelled at me. "What? I'm working. I'm not playing around. Tell Dad to stop being so picky. Your father didn't say anything. I just thought he might feel that way." It was clear my husband had no intention of helping with the caregiving. On top of that, he seemed overly defensive. I had a sinking feeling that my suspicions were right. But at the time, I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge it. I was afraid of what would happen if I pressed him and uncovered something I didn't want to know. After all, I had married him against my parents' wishes, and I had nowhere to go. I also worried about my in-laws. In the end, I decided to continue on with my life as usual. One day, I thought about getting an electric wheelchair for my father-in-law. He was using a cane and a regular wheelchair. But with an electric one, he could enjoy short walks. I imagined pushing my blind mother-in-law in her wheelchair alongside him, so we could all go a bit farther on our outings. I shared the idea with my husband, fully expecting him to agree. But his reaction was less than enthusiastic. "Really? Do we need that?" He looked pained as he replied. "I'm barely keeping us afloat on my income alone. Do we really need to waste money like that?" It was true we weren't wealthy. But I didn't see it as a waste if it made his parents even a little bit happier. "Then, how about we pay it off little by little using your parents' pensions? Maybe we could borrow a bit from the bank too?" At that, my husband seemed somewhat convinced and said, "Just don't make it my problem." Of course, I couldn't tell my in-laws exactly what he said. Instead, I told them that he'd agreed to let us take out a loan. And my father-in-law was delighted. We went to the bank together, got a loan, and purchased the electric wheelchair. My in-laws were very happy with it. However, not long after, my father-in-law passed away. Both my mother-in-law and I were heartbroken, but my husband muttered, "He just left us with debt. I told you we didn't need to buy it." I was sure my mother-in-law heard him. I felt incredibly guilty. It was just the two of us, my mother-in-law and me, living in the house now. Even though she was blind, there were some things she could manage on her own inside the house, which lessened the burden on me quite a bit. Around that time, my husband suggested we start thinking about having children. I had once doubted him, but hearing that, I convinced myself that I must have misunderstood something. We eventually had 2 children together. But unfortunately, my husband didn't change even after they were born. He still didn't care about anything related to the household. I was overwhelmed with housework and raising the children. But at least my mother-in-law seemed happy, which was a small comfort. Though she couldn't see the grandchildren, after my father-in-law passed away. Having the kids around seemed to lift her spirits. She'd been so down, but now she smiled more, listening to the children's lively voices. Despite everything, we managed to live happily enough. Still, just as my colleague once said, my husband continued to come home late from work. I'll never forget what he said at my father-in-law's funeral. He didn't show any love toward his mother or our children. Lately, he would even leave on his days off, saying he was going to work. And I'd stopped feeling any affection for him. I began to think that as long as he brought in money, that was enough. Our broken marriage continued like this. But our children grew up to be kind and thoughtful. The real change in our family came in the spring, when our daughter was 18 and preparing to go to college. I'm heading to work. It was a Saturday, a day he was supposed to be off. I stopped him before he left. "You promised to take your mom to the hospital today." It was a promise he'd made just a few days earlier. Today was my mother-in-law's health checkup. And it was also the day we were set to get the keys to our daughter's new apartment, where she'd be living on her own during college. We'd known about these plans in advance, so I had asked him to take his mother to the hospital. "What? That's your job as a housewife?" he shouted at me. "I told you, today's the day Mia gets the keys to her apartment. We need to set everything up for her before she starts college, and I said I'd go with her. When I snapped back at him, my husband got angry too. I had no memory of ever talking back or defying him before. The fact that I was standing up to him for the first time seemed to make him even more agitated. I didn't sign up for this. I married you because I thought I'd be stuck with an old man and an old hag who no one else wanted. And now you want me to take care of her? If you can't take her, let her go by herself. I was speechless. How could anyone be this cruel? I had sensed for some time that he didn't care about his mother. But to suggest sending a blind woman out alone? And to insult me like that. It was unbearable to find out the real reason he had married me. I was filled with regret. That's enough. That's all I said to him, finally giving up on expecting anything from him. Satisfied that I didn't argue back, he said, "All right then, you take care of the old hag and the kids." And with that, he left the house and never came back. In the end, our daughter had to handle getting the keys to her new apartment on her own and buy everything she needed for her new life. Meanwhile, I took my mother-in-law to her health checkup. Somehow, we made it through the day. Everyone noticed that my husband hadn't returned, but no one said a word about it. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was from my husband. There was no return address, only his name. And inside was a divorce agreement and a brief letter. He wrote that he was living with his mistress now. Didn't want anything to do with the debt left by his parents. And told me to live my life without him. I was exhausted. If this is how things were going to be, cutting ties with him would make me happier. That's what I thought. Before submitting the divorce papers, I told my kids and my mother-in-law. The person who took it the hardest was my mother-in-law. "I'm so sorry." She just kept repeating that, crying as she held my hand. "I've been happy enough with you, Emily, and Mia and John. But once you're divorced, I'll be a stranger. I'll live on my own from now on. It'll take some time, but I'll move out." That's what she whispered. I responded a bit more firmly. "You are like a real mother to me, and to the kids. You're their one and only grandmother. You don't need to worry about anything. Even if I divorce, we're still family. Let's keep living together just as we have been." Hearing that, she sobbed and thanked me. But I couldn't ignore the fear that lingered in the back of my mind. Even if my husband was only an ATM, his presence had provided some financial security. Now, he was gone. I desperately looked for a job, but after years of being a housewife, no one wanted to hire me. Both Mia and John offered to work. When I was beginning to lose hope, my mother-in-law said, "Don't worry about anything. Let the kids go to school as usual. Emily, you don't need to work either. Leave it to me." We were puzzled by her words, but as she promised, nothing in our lives changed. In fact, we were living more comfortably than when my husband was still around. I submitted the divorce papers. And my mother-in-law wanted to file a missing person report for my ex-husband. But I didn't want to see him again. Still, I knew she wanted to see her son, so we filed the report. However, my ex-husband was never found. We continued to live as a family of 4, creating many happy memories. 2 years ago, my mother-in-law passed away and joined my father-in-law. She never got to see her son again. Even though he was her child, there was no way to contact him. When I managed to find his address, no one lived there anymore. We had a small funeral for her with just the 3 of us, and we said our goodbyes. And now, standing in front of me is my ex-husband. I was out shopping when he suddenly appeared in front of me. I thought I must be mistaken and tried to ignore him, but he kept staring at me. He recognized me. He must have thought the same, because he looked over at the much younger woman standing beside him and spoke up, showing her off. Emily, right? Still looking as miserable as ever. That's a bit rude, huh? The woman beside him giggled as she said that. It was clear they were mocking me, and I sighed. I was about to walk past them when my ex-husband said, "Has the poor old hag kicked the bucket?" I froze in my tracks and glared at him. The poor old hag? Who are you talking about? He snickered and replied, "You know who I mean. That blind old woman you were stuck living with. Heard through the grapevine she passed. Must have been tough for you, huh? Well, now you're free. Though for someone your age, there's only so much freedom you can enjoy, right?" His disgusting laughter echoed in the air. My anger reached its boiling point. But I knew that reacting now would only play into his hands. I forced a smile, hiding my rage. Yeah, I got $3 million from the inheritance. So now I'm living freely without having to work. Thanks for your concern. What? The smile disappeared from my ex-husband's face, though he had just been mocking me moments ago. Well then. As I tried to walk past him, he stood there dumbfounded. Then, in a panic, he called after me. Wait. $3 million in inheritance? What are you talking about? What do you mean, what am I talking about? I mean exactly what I said. Thanks for disappearing, by the way. It made the inheritance process go smoothly without you. My ex-husband's face turned pale. Good, I thought. I hadn't planned on telling him anything. But he deserved to know just how shallow and foolish he really was. You've got to be kidding me. I'm her son. How come I never heard about such a large inheritance? I should have a right to some of that money. I couldn't help but smirk at his words. Oh, but you weren't around. You know, right? If you go missing for 7 years, the law treats it as if you're dead. What? So, in your mother's will, the inheritance came to our son, our daughter, and me. There's no place for you anymore. He stood there, dumbfounded, his expression ridiculous. I nearly laughed out loud. It was only after my mother-in-law passed away that I realized she had planned this all along, asking me to file a missing person report for her son. The substantial inheritance my mother-in-law had left behind. A man who introduced himself as a lawyer came and explained everything to us. It turned out that my mother-in-law's family had been landowners. Like me, she had been estranged from her family, but she still had the right to inherit. When her parents passed away, she quietly took the inheritance without telling anyone. Thanks to her, we were able to live comfortably without worrying about anything. I remember asking her once, "Mother, how do you manage your money? If it's just from your pension, please feel free to spend it however you like." My mother-in-law smiled and said, "I'm spending it exactly how I want, living happily with my family." That's what she told me. From the way she used her money, I knew it wasn't just her pension. But it was her money, and given our situation, we gratefully accepted her generosity. The inheritance she received was far more than she could ever spend in her lifetime. The issue was my husband. If something had happened to her, he would have inherited everything. But she didn't want him to have it. When she discussed this with the lawyer, my husband disappeared. She felt it was a sign that he had severed ties with us. Although she was sad to be separated from us, She had planned to move into a nursing home, thinking she wouldn't burden us and would spend the inheritance until there was nothing left. But both our son and daughter, as well as myself, insisted that she was family and that she should stay with us. My mother-in-law said there was nothing in the world that made her happier than that. My mother-in-law had wanted to leave the inheritance to us. So she followed the lawyer's advice and filed a missing person report for my husband. By law, after he had been gone for 7 years, he was considered legally dead. A year after that, my mother-in-law passed away, and her inheritance was passed on to her grandchildren, our son and daughter, in place of my husband. Although I wasn't entitled to inherit anything, my mother-in-law left a will that included me as a beneficiary. This way, we were able to receive what she had wanted to give us. You left, and your mother took care of everything. Mia's tuition, John's, and all our living expenses. Thanks to her, we were able to live happily. So, thank you for leaving. My ex-husband stood there, pale, his mouth gaping like a fish. Serves him right, I thought. After that, he started contacting us, ranting about how he was entitled to a portion of the inheritance. This from the man who had been completely silent for years. What a piece of work. People who are legally dead don't get a share of the inheritance. I told him that over and over. Still, he wasn't satisfied and demanded we sit down and talk. I consulted our lawyer. For him to claim any inheritance, he'd need to revoke the missing person declaration and go through a lot of legal procedures. In most cases like this, the grandchildren keep the inheritance. We had no intention of giving him a single penny. I relayed the lawyer's advice to him. If he wanted to inherit, he would also need to pay inheritance tax. When I told him to take care of all that, he fell silent. The kids were present during the conversation as well. I can't take time off work. I don't have time for paperwork. And inheritance tax? I shouldn't have to pay that. You guys should pay my share too. I supported you for years. The least you can do is handle this for me. His audacity left us speechless. Apparently, he was working a day labor job now, and missing even one day was problematic for him. The job he had while we were married? He got fired after repeatedly skipping work without notice. When I asked why he left that job and why he was struggling so much financially, he admitted he had debts, thanks to his former mistress. He'd been moving from place to place, working day-to-day jobs just to pay off what he owed. You understand, right? He said, but I couldn't muster even a drop of sympathy. That woman you were with didn't work out, huh? Then who was that woman I saw you with recently? Puffing out his chest, my ex-husband replied. She's the one I've been searching for all my life. He was clearly lost in his own delusions. Our son, John, was trying hard to hold back his laughter. Are you married to her? I asked. Well, no. We've only been together for 6 months. My ex-husband mumbled in a small voice. That was enough to send our son into fits of laughter. My daughter and I were too stunned to say anything, simply sighing at the absurdity in front of us. And what about the woman you left with when we got divorced? She left. Said she couldn't make me happy. He said it so casually, without even realizing that he had been dumped. He must have gone through woman after woman, never understanding the problem was him. You're not young anymore. Stop pretending you are, old man. I couldn't help but give him that piece of advice, feeling embarrassed for him. But she's the one, my soulmate. Hearing that, I realized that it was pointless to say anything more to him. At least I had found out his address after running into him again. He was living in the next town, in an apartment under a woman's name. My son, John, ended up buying the entire building and becoming the landlord. Grandma gave us that money, and it'd be a waste just to let it sit. I figured investing in real estate would be a smart move. That's what John said. I thought he might have done it to help his father, but that wasn't the case. In fact, if the rent was even a day late, John was quick to go and demand it. The previous landlord had been lenient, but not my son. Mom went through so much because of him. He chose this selfish lifestyle, so he should struggle more than you ever did. It was John's way of punishing his father. My ex-husband had never done anything fatherly for the kids. So it was only natural that they had their own feelings about it. Eventually, unable to endure his new life, my ex-husband came to me, fell to his knees, and begged for forgiveness. I'm so sorry. I was wrong to leave everything to you, including taking care of my parents and the kids. Seeing him like that made me sigh. He was desperate. But, I have my own life now. Couldn't you ask John to lower the rent just a little? He asked with teary eyes. It must have been tough for him. I don't know. If you had at least been a good father to the kids, things wouldn't have turned out like this. You failed as a husband, as a father, and as a person. Now, what do you have left? What was your life even about? You should think long and hard about that. With that, my ex-husband quietly left. His figure looked so small as he walked away. In the end, after repeatedly failing to pay rent, he was forced to leave the apartment. He moved into an old, drafty building that was about 50 years old. I heard he's still working day-to-day jobs, struggling to make ends meet. The soulmate he had been with when I saw him that day? Apparently, she left him when he moved out of the apartment. He had been paying her living expenses, and since he couldn't afford rent anymore, it wasn't surprising she left him. In fact, he should be thankful she stayed with him as long as she did. She was still young, and like me back then, she probably didn't see who he truly was. As for us, we're living happily now, thanks to my mother-in-law. Just like John said, we invested in real estate and stocks. And now we have passive income that allows us to travel and enjoy life. And Mia is getting married. Her fiancé is a kind man, and he treats me well too. Our family is growing, and our happiness will only increase from here. I can appreciate this joy all the more because we overcame such a difficult past.
The scent of lavender fabric softener clung to Peter's shirt as I pulled it from the dryer. It was a comforting smell, one that usually brought a smile to my face. But not today. Today, as I reached into his pocket to check for loose change before folding, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I fished it out, my heart racing as I uncurled my fingers. There, nestled in my palm, was a delicate gold wedding band. But it wasn't mine. Hannah? Peter's voice echoed from downstairs. Have you seen my blue tie? I froze, the ring burning in my hand. Just a minute, I called back, my voice surprisingly steady. I quickly slipped the ring into my own pocket and grabbed his tie from the laundry basket. As I descended the stairs, Peter was pacing in the living room, checking his watch. There you are, he said, barely looking up. I'm running late for my meeting. I handed him the tie, studying his face. Did he know I'd found the ring? Was there a flicker of guilt in his eyes? But he just gave me a perfunctory peck on the cheek and headed for the door. Peter, I said, my voice catching. He turned, eyebrows raised. I was thinking we could have dinner together tonight. It's been a while since we've had a proper meal, just the two of us. He sighed, checking his watch again. I don't know, Hannah. This project is really heating up. I might be working late. Oh. I tried to hide my disappointment. Well, maybe tomorrow then? "We'll see," he said, already halfway out the door. "Don't wait up." The slam of the door echoed through the empty house. I sank onto the couch, my hand instinctively reaching for the ring in my pocket. 20 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to: secrets and lies wrapped in a gold band that wasn't mine. I pulled out my phone, my finger hovering over my best friend Maggie's number. But what would I say? "Hey, Mag, I think my husband's cheating on me." The words stuck in my throat. Instead, I found myself dialing another number. It rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. "Moore and Associates, how may I direct your call?" "Yes, hello," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like to speak with someone about hiring a private investigator." There was a pause on the other end. "Of course, ma'am. I'll transfer you to Mr. Moore. May I have your name?" I hesitated, then squared my shoulders. Hannah Thompson." As I waited to be transferred, I caught sight of our wedding photo on the mantel. Peter and I, young and in love, beaming at the camera. When had that happiness slipped away? And more importantly, how had I not noticed? The line clicked and a deep voice came on. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Jack Moore. I understand you're interested in our services." I took a deep breath, twisting my ring on my finger. "Yes, Mr. Moore, I need your help. I think my husband is having an affair." There was a moment of silence, then Mr. Moore spoke again, his voice gentle but professional. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Thompson. Can you tell me what's led you to this conclusion?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain the years of growing distance, the late nights at the office, the way Peter's eyes no longer lit up when he saw me? And now, the damning evidence of that other ring, hidden away in Peter's pocket like a dirty secret. As I struggled to find the right words, I heard the front door open. My heart leapt into my throat. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moore," I whispered urgently. "I have to go. I'll call you back." I ended the call just as Peter walked into the living room, his brow furrowed. "Hannah, who were you talking to?" I plastered on a smile, hoping he couldn't hear the pounding of my heart. "Oh, just Maggie. Girl talk, you know." He nodded absently, already loosening his tie. "Listen, I forgot some files I need for my meeting. I'll be heading back out in a minute." As he climbed the stairs, I felt the weight of the other woman's ring in my pocket, a silent accusation against the man I thought I knew. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Peter, not yet. First, I needed answers, and I would get them, no matter the cost. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as memories of Peter and I flooded my mind. How had we gone from that bright-eyed couple to this? I glanced at Peter's sleeping form, his back turned to me. When had that become the norm? As dawn broke, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him. In the kitchen, I absently stirred my coffee, lost in thought. The first time I met Peter flashed before my eyes. A chance encounter at a bookstore, both of us reaching for the same novel. "You have excellent taste," he'd said, flashing that charming smile that made my heart skip a beat. We'd spent hours talking that day about books, dreams, life. It felt like I'd known him forever. Now, 20 years later, I wondered if I'd ever really known him at all. The sound of Peter's footsteps jolted me back to reality. He entered the kitchen, already dressed for work. "Morning," he mumbled, barely glancing my way as he poured his coffee. I took a deep breath. "Peter, I was thinking, maybe we could take a weekend trip soon? Just the two of us?" He frowned, checking his phone. "Hannah, you know how busy work is right now. I can't just take off." "It doesn't have to be now." I pressed. "Maybe next month? We could go to that little B&B we loved, remember?" Peter sighed, finally looking at me. "Look, I appreciate the thought, but now's not a good time. Maybe later, okay?" As he turned to leave, I felt something inside me snap. "When is it ever a good time, Peter? When was the last time we did anything together?" He paused, his back to me. "Hannah, don't start. I don't have time for this right now." "You never have time," I exclaimed, my voice rising. "You're always working, always busy. It's like I don't even exist anymore." Peter whirled around, his face flushed with anger. "What do you want from me, Hannah? I'm working my ass off to provide for us, and all you do is complain." His words hit me like a slap. "All I do? I've dedicated my life to our home, to you. And this is how you repay me?" For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by cold indifference. "I have to go," he said flatly. "We'll talk about this later." As the door slammed behind him, I sank to the floor, my body shaking with sobs. How had we become strangers living under the same roof? With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Moore's number. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful. "Mrs. Thompson," his calm voice answered. "I'm glad you called back. Are you ready to proceed?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Yes, Mr. Moore, I need to know the truth about my husband." "I understand," he replied. "Can you tell me about any suspicious behavior you've noticed?" I hesitated, then spilled everything, the late nights, the emotional distance, and finally, the ring I'd found. As I spoke, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. "That's certainly concerning," Mr. Moore said when I finished. "We'll start our investigation immediately. But Mrs. Thompson, I must warn you, are you prepared for what we might uncover?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Was I ready to have my worst fears confirmed, to have my entire life upended? "I have to know," I whispered, more to myself than to Mr. Moore. "Whatever it is, I need to know the truth." "Very well," he replied. "We'll be in touch soon with our findings." As I ended the call, I noticed a text from Peter. "Working late tonight, don't wait up." My fingers hovered over the keypad, a dozen angry responses flashing through my mind. Instead, I simply replied, "Okay." I looked around our home, filled with memories of happier times, photos of our wedding, our honeymoon, holidays spent together. Each image now felt like a mockery of what we'd become. Whatever Mr. Moore uncovered, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. And as that realization sank in, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The worst was yet to come, but for the first time in years, I was ready to face it head on. The manila envelope sat on the kitchen table, taunting me. Mr. Moore had delivered it personally this morning, his face grim as he handed it over. "Mrs. Thompson," he'd said, "I think you should prepare yourself." Now, hours later, I still couldn't bring myself to open it. The truth I'd been seeking suddenly felt too heavy to bear. But as I heard Peter's key in the lock, I knew it was now or never. "Hannah?" Peter called out, his voice echoing through the house. "You home?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. In the kitchen. He walked in, loosening his tie. His eyes fell on the envelope. "What's that?" "Why don't you tell me, Peter?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I pushed the envelope towards him. "Go ahead, open it." Confusion flickered across his face as he reached for it. "Hannah, what's going on?" "Just open it," I repeated, my heart pounding. As Peter pulled out the contents, photographs, hotel receipts, a transcript of a damning phone conversation, I watched the color drain from his face. "Hannah," he started, his voice low. "I can explain." "Explain?" I cut him off, anger surging through me. "Explain how you've been lying to me for months, how you've been sneaking around with her." I grabbed one of the photos, shoving it in his face. It showed Peter and a young blonde woman, locked in an intimate embrace outside a hotel. "Who is she, Peter? How long has this been going on?" He ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. "Her name's Amber. We met at a conference 6 months ago. It just happened." "It just happened," I repeated incredulously. "For 6 months? And what about this?" I pulled out the other woman's wedding ring from my pocket, the one I'd found in his laundry. Peter's eyes widened in recognition. "Where did you?" "It doesn't matter," I snapped. "What matters is that you've been living a double life, Peter. You've made a fool of me, of our marriage." "Oh, come on, Hannah," Peter scoffed, his initial shock giving way to defensiveness. "It's not like our marriage has been perfect. When was the last time you did anything besides play housewife?" His words hit me like a slap. "Play housewife? I've dedicated my life to our home, to you." "And that's the problem," Peter shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You've become nothing but a housewife. Where's the woman I fell in love with, the one with dreams and ambitions?" I stared at him, stunned. "So this is my fault? Because I chose to support you, to build our life together?" Peter's face softened slightly. "Hannah, that's not what I meant. It's just, things change, people change. And instead of talking to me about it, you decided to cheat?" I felt tears stinging my eyes. "Was I really that unimportant to you?" "Of course not," Peter said, reaching for my hand. I jerked away. "Hannah, please, we can work this out. I'll end things with Amber. We can go to counseling." "No," I cut him off, my voice firm. "There's no coming back from this, Peter. You've broken us beyond repair." "So that's it?" Peter's voice rose again. 20 years of marriage and you're just giving up? I'm not the one who gave up, I shot back. You did that the moment you decided to betray me. We stood there, the weight of 2 decades crumbling between us. Finally, Peter spoke, his voice cold. Fine. If that's how you want it, I'll call my lawyer in the morning. As he stormed out of the kitchen, I called after him, Peter. He turned, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Don't forget to take your girlfriend's ring with you, I said, tossing it at his feet. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house. I sank into a chair, my body shaking with sobs. Everything I thought I knew, everything I'd built my life around had just shattered. But as the initial shock subsided, I felt something else stirring within me. A spark of determination. Peter might have broken my heart, but I refused to let him break my spirit. Whatever came next, I would face it head on. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The house felt emptier than ever as I wandered from room to room, unable to settle. It had been 3 days since my confrontation with Peter, and he hadn't come home since. Part of me was relieved, but another part, a part I hated, missed him desperately. I found myself in our bedroom, staring at the photos on the dresser. 20 years of memories, now tainted by betrayal. As I picked up our wedding photo, something inside me cracked. What if I had overreacted? What if there was still a chance to save our marriage? Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my phone and dialed Peter's number. It went straight to voicemail. Peter, it's me, I said, my voice shaking. I think we need to talk. Please come home. Hours passed with no response. I paced the living room, rehearsing what I'd say when he arrived, how I'd apologize for my anger, how we could work through this together. But as night fell, the house remained silent. Just as I was about to give up hope, I heard a key in the lock. My heart leaped as Peter walked in, looking tired and disheveled. Hannah, he said, his voice wary, I got your message. I took a deep breath. Peter, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have reacted so harshly. I think if we just talk. Stop. He cut me off, holding up a hand. Hannah, I'm only here to get some clothes. I'm staying at Amber's for now. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. You're living with her? Peter sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's complicated, Hannah. But yes, I am. But I called to apologize, to try and work things out, I stammered, feeling foolish and small. Work things out? Peter laughed bitterly. Hannah, our marriage has been over for a long time. We were just going through the motions. That's not true, I protested weakly. We can fix this, Peter. We can go to counseling, try to reconnect. I don't want to fix it. Peter exploded, his face flushed with anger. Don't you get it? I'm in love with Amber. She understands me in a way you never have. I felt like I was drowning, grasping for anything to keep me afloat. But what about our life together? Our home, our memories. Peter's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, Hannah. I truly am. But I can't keep living a lie. Amber's pregnant. We're starting a family together. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Pregnant, I whispered, my voice barely audible. How long have you known? A few weeks, Peter admitted. I was trying to find the right time to tell you. Anger surged through me, momentarily displacing the shock. The right time? Was that before or after you let me humiliate myself by begging you to come back? Peter at least had the decency to look ashamed. I'm sorry, Hannah. I never meant for things to end this way. As he turned to head upstairs, presumably to pack his things, something inside me snapped. You're sorry? I shouted, following him. You destroy our marriage, get another woman pregnant, and all you can say is you're sorry? Peter whirled around, his face contorted with frustration. What do you want from me, Hannah? I've made my choice. It's time for you to accept it and move on. Move on? I laughed hysterically. You've taken everything from me, Peter. My trust, my love, my future. What exactly am I supposed to move on to? For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with in Peter's eyes, but it quickly vanished, replaced by cold determination. That's not my problem anymore, Hannah. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings. As Peter disappeared into our bedroom, no, his old bedroom, I stood frozen in the hallway. The life I'd known, the future I'd planned, was crumbling around me. But as the initial shock wore off, I felt something else rising within me, a fierce, burning anger. Peter might think he'd taken everything from me, but he was wrong. I still had my dignity, my strength, and as I listened to him pack, I made a decision. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my revenge. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, a crisp manila envelope that felt like a death sentence for my marriage. I stared at Peter's signature, the familiar scrawl now seeming cold and foreign. My hands shook as I reached for the phone, dialing my sister Kate's number. "Hannah, what's wrong?" Kate's concerned voice came through. "He's really doing it, Kate," I choked out. "Peter's filed for divorce." "Oh, honey," Kate sighed. "I'm coming over. Don't you dare sign anything until I get there." An hour later, Kate was at my kitchen table, poring over the documents. Her brow furrowed as she flipped through the pages. "Hannah, have you read this thoroughly?" I shook my head, still numb. I just saw his signature and... Kate's face hardened. "Well, you need to read it. Peter's trying to screw you over." Those words jolted me out of my stupor. "What do you mean?" "He's claiming that since you were just a housewife," Kate spat the words, "you're not entitled to half of the assets. He's offering you a pittance, Hannah." Anger flared within me, momentarily displacing the grief. How dare he? I supported him through law school, I managed our home. "I know, sis," Kate interrupted gently, "but Peter's a lawyer. He knows how to manipulate the system." As the reality of the situation sank in, a new wave of despair washed over me. "What am I going to do, Kate? I don't have any money of my own. How can I fight this?" Kate squeezed my hand. "You're not alone, Hannah. We'll figure this out." Just then my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Jack Moore. I have some information you need to see. Can we meet?" I showed the message to Kate, explaining about the private investigator I'd hired. "Hannah," Kate said slowly, "I think you need to meet with him. Peter's playing dirty. It's time you fought back." The next day, I met Mr. Moore at a quiet cafe. He slid a thick folder across the table. "Mrs. Thompson, what I found goes beyond just the affair." With trembling hands, I opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, and offshore account details. My eyes widened as I realized what I was looking at. "Peter's been hiding assets," Mr. Moore explained. "Significant ones. He's been preparing for this divorce for months, maybe even years." The betrayal cut deep, but something else was rising within me. A fierce determination. "What does this mean for the divorce?" Mr. Moore leaned forward. "It means you have leverage, Mrs. Thompson. Peter's committed fraud. If this comes to light, he could lose his law license." As the implications sank in, I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Thank you, Mr. Moore. You've been incredibly helpful." Leaving the cafe, I called Kate. "I need you to recommend a good divorce lawyer," I said, my voice steady. "The best you know." "Hannah?" Kate sounded surprised by my tone. "What happened?" "I'm done being the victim, Kate. Peter thinks he can walk all over me. He's about to learn how wrong he is." That evening, as I sat in my empty house, I pulled out an old photo album. Pictures of Peter and me in happier times stared back at me. I traced Peter's face in our wedding photo, remembering the man I thought I'd married. "You should have been honest with me, Peter," I whispered to the smiling face. "Now all bets are off." I closed the album with a snap, my mind made up. Tomorrow I'd meet with a lawyer. I'd fight for what was rightfully mine. And Peter? He was about to discover that the just a housewife he'd dismissed was a force to be reckoned with. As I climbed into my bed that night, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my comeback. The sleek office of Sarah Goldstein, divorce attorney extraordinaire, felt like a war room. Spread across her desk were the documents Mr. Moore had provided, along with the insulting divorce papers Peter had served me. "Hannah," Sarah said, her eyes sharp behind her glasses, "with this evidence of hidden assets, we have a strong case, but we need to move fast." I nodded, a newfound determination coursing through me. "What's our next step?" "We file a countersuit," Sarah explained. "We'll demand a full financial disclosure and push for an emergency hearing. Peter won't see it coming." As we strategized, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Peter. "We need to talk. Meet me at the house tonight." I showed Sarah the message. She frowned. "Be careful, Hannah. He might be trying to manipulate you." "I know," I replied, my jaw set. "But I'm not the same woman he left behind. I can handle Peter now." That evening, I walked into our once shared home, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. Peter was waiting in the living room, looking haggard. "Hannah," he started, his voice softer than I'd heard in months. "I've been thinking maybe we rushed into this divorce. Maybe we could try counseling?" For a moment my heart leapt, but then I remembered the hidden assets, the lies, the other woman carrying his child. "Why the sudden change of heart, Peter?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. "I miss you, Hannah, our life together. It's not the same with, well, you know." "With Amber?" I supplied, watching him flinch at the name. "Your pregnant girlfriend?" Peter's eyes widened. "How did you—" "I know a lot of things now, Peter." I cut him off, including the offshore accounts and hidden properties. The color drained from his face. "Hannah, I can explain." "Save it," I snapped. "I'm done with your explanations and your lies. You wanted a divorce? You've got one, but it's going to be on my terms now." Peter's demeanor changed instantly, his face hardening. "You're bluffing. You don't have any proof." I pulled out my phone, showing him a photo of one of the documents Mr. Moore had provided. "Want to bet your law license on that?" For a moment, I saw fear in Peter's eyes. Then, like a cornered animal, he lashed out. "You think you can threaten me? I made you, Hannah. Without me, you're nothing but a washed-up housewife." His words stung, but I refused to let him see how they affected me. "Is that what you think? Well, this washed-up housewife is about to take you for everything you've got." Peter lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "You can't do this to me. I won't let you ruin everything I've worked for." Fear surged through me, but I stood my ground. "Let go of me, Peter. Now." Just then, the front door burst open. Kate rushed in, followed by a police officer. "Hannah, are you okay? I got worried when you didn't answer my calls." Peter released me immediately, stepping back. The officer looked between us. "Is everything all right here?" I rubbed my arm, already feeling bruises forming. "No," I said firmly. "It's not. I'd like to press charges for assault." As the officer led Peter away, reading him his rights, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a grim satisfaction. Kate hugged me tightly. "Oh, Hannah, I'm so sorry. Are you sure you want to go through with the charges?" I nodded, watching as Peter was placed in the police car. Yes, it's time he faced consequences for his actions. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind. Peter's attempt at reconciliation, his true colors showing when cornered, the fear I'd felt when he grabbed me. But beneath it all was a steely resolve. I'd stood up to Peter. I'd refused to be manipulated or intimidated. For the first time in years, I felt truly in control of my life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, court hearings, divorce proceedings, rebuilding my life. But as I drifted off to sleep, I knew one thing for certain: I was ready to face whatever came next. The old Hannah was gone, and in her place was a woman who would never again let anyone underestimate or mistreat her. The courthouse loomed before me, its stone facade a silent witness to countless battles. Today it would host mine. I smoothed my skirt, took a deep breath, and walked in, Sarah Goldstein at my side. "Remember," Sarah whispered, "stay calm, no matter what Peter or his lawyers say. We have the upper hand." I nodded, steeling myself as we entered the courtroom. Peter was already there, looking polished in an expensive suit. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of surprise, perhaps at my composure, or the determination in my gaze. As the judge entered and proceedings began, I felt a surreal calm. This was it, the moment that would define my future. Peter's lawyer spoke first, painting me as a vindictive wife, making false accusations out of spite. I clenched my fists under the table, willing myself to remain stoic. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Thompson has committed fraud by hiding substantial assets." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Peter's face paled as Sarah presented the documents from Mr. Moore. His lawyer scrambled to object, but the judge overruled him. As Sarah detailed the offshore accounts and properties Peter had concealed, I watched him squirm. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes, the fear of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. Then the bombshell. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Sarah continued, "we have evidence of Mr. Thompson's infidelity, including his relationship with a woman who is now pregnant with his child." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Peter's lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously to him. "I caught fragments. Didn't tell me. Changes everything." The judge called a recess, and as we filed out, I felt lightheaded. Sarah squeezed my arm. "You're doing great, Hannah. Stay strong." In the hallway, Peter cornered me. "How could you do this?" he hissed. "You're ruining everything." I stood my ground. "No, Peter. You ruined everything when you decided to betray our marriage." His eyes narrowed. "You think you've won? I still have tricks up my sleeve. By the time I'm done, you'll be lucky if you get a penny." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted near the courtroom doors. A young blonde woman burst in, her pregnant belly obvious. "Peter!" she cried. "What's going on? Why didn't you tell me about this hearing?" Amber, Peter's mistress. The woman carrying his child. Our eyes met, and I saw confusion and hurt in hers. In that moment, I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. She, too, had been deceived by Peter. Peter looked panicked, caught between his wife and his pregnant girlfriend. "Amber, you shouldn't be here. Please, just go home." "Go home?" Amber's voice rose. "I'm carrying your child, Peter. You promised we'd be together." The hallway had gone silent, all eyes on our drama. I saw pity in some faces, disgust in others. Peter, the man I'd loved for 20 years, looked small and pathetic. Suddenly, Amber turned to me. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't know. He told me you were separated, that you didn't love him anymore." The weight of it all, the lies, the betrayal, the public humiliation, crashed over me. I felt my knees buckle, but Sarah caught me, steadying me. "Mrs. Thompson," the bailiff called, "the judge is ready to resume." As we re-entered the courtroom, I felt as if I was walking through a fog. Peter's deceptions had hurt not just me, but this young woman too. The life I'd built, the future I'd planned, all of it was gone. But as I took my seat, facing the judge, a strange clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about the money or the assets anymore. It was about justice, about standing up for myself and every other woman who had been lied to and manipulated. I looked at Peter, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "You've lost, Peter," I said quietly. "Not just the case, but everything that ever mattered." As the judge called the court to order, I sat up straight, ready to face whatever came next. The old Hannah might have crumbled under the weight of this moment, but the woman I'd become? She was ready to fight and win. The sun streamed through the windows of my new apartment, casting a warm glow on the freshly painted walls. It had been 6 months since the fateful day in court, and my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. I sipped my morning coffee, savoring the quiet moment before starting my day. The stillness was interrupted by a ping from my phone, a news alert. My heart skipped a beat as I read the headline, "Prominent lawyer Peter Thompson disbarred for fraud and ethical violations." A mix of emotions washed over me: vindication, sadness, and finally, a sense of closure. I had won the divorce settlement, exposing Peter's hidden assets and securing my financial future. But the victory had come at a cost. The scandal had rocked our community, and Peter's career had crumbled in the aftermath. As I scrolled through the article, my phone rang. It was Kate. "Hannah, have you seen the news?" she asked, her voice a mix of concern and excitement. "I just did," I replied, surprised by the calmness in my voice. "How are you feeling about it?" Kate paused. "I'm more concerned about how you're feeling. Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, considering her question. "You know what, Kate? I really am. For the first time in years, I feel free." We chatted for a few more minutes before I had to get ready for work. Yes, work. In the months following the divorce, I had rediscovered my passion for interior design, a dream I had set aside when I married Peter. Now I was apprenticing at a local firm, learning the ropes and building a new career. As I walked to the office, I passed the coffee shop where Peter and I used to have our Sunday brunches. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face, Amber, Peter's former mistress. Her baby bump had given way to a stroller. Our eyes met, and after a moment's hesitation, she gave me a small, sad smile. I nodded in return, feeling a surprising lack of bitterness. We had both been victims of Peter's deception, in our own ways. At the office, my colleague Sandra greeted me with a knowing look. "Quite the headlines today, huh?" she said, handing me a stack of fabric swatches. I nodded, focusing on the task at hand. "Life has a way of balancing the scales," I replied, surprised by the wisdom in my own words. As the day progressed, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The pain of betrayal, the fear of an uncertain future, the struggle to reclaim my identity. It had all led me here, to this moment of strength and self-discovery. That evening, as I walked home, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Peter. My heart raced as I opened it. "Hannah, I know I have no right to ask, but I need help. Can we talk? I stared at the message, memories of our life together flashing through my mind. The young, ambitious lawyer I had fallen in love with, the man who had betrayed and belittled me, the broken figure in the courtroom, watching his lies unravel. Taking a deep breath, I typed my response. I'm sorry, Peter, but that chapter of our lives is closed. I wish you well, but I can't be the one to help you anymore. As I hit send, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The last tie to my old life had been severed. I was no longer Peter's wife, no longer the woman who would sacrifice her own needs for his ambitions. I was Hannah, strong, independent, and finally, truly free. Entering my apartment, I was greeted by the vision board I had created, filled with dreams and goals for my new life. Travel plans, design projects, even a tentative sketch for a book I hoped to write someday. Each item represented a piece of myself I was reclaiming and nurturing. As I settled onto my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the city, I felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited about the journey. Here's to new beginnings, I whispered to myself, raising my glass to the fading light. The Hannah who had started this journey would never have believed where it would lead. But the woman I had become, she was ready for anything life might bring. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all.
I'm just going to use the restroom before we leave, I said, grabbing my purse with my phone and documents inside. I stepped off the train, feeling the cool air of the platform on my face. I stood there watching as the train doors closed, as the whistle blew, and as it slowly began to pull away from the station. My phone buzzed in my purse, snapping me out of my thoughts. Scott's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. Nancy, where are you? Scott's panicked voice came through. We're not on the same path anymore, Scott, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm divorcing you. I hung up before he could respond. My hand shook as I opened my banking app and blocked Scott's access to our joint account. Barely a minute passed before my phone rang again. This time, it was Janet. I held the phone away from my ear as she shouted insults and threats, demanding that I pay for their trip and compensate them for emotional distress. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke calmly. Janet, I'm not afraid of your threat. If you post any slander, I won't hesitate to take legal action. I blocked her number, then Scott's, and finally Larry's, just to be sure. Taking a deep breath, I called a cab and went home. The weekend passed in a blur of emotions and practical tasks. I packed Scott's belongings, contacted a lawyer, and drafted the divorce papers. By Friday morning, I felt drained but determined. The sound of a key turning in the lock made me tense. Scott walked in looking disheveled and desperate. Nancy, please, he said, walking toward me with open arms. I stepped back, pointing to the suitcases by the door. Your things are packed. It's time for you to go. His expression twisted. You're not saying that. With a frantic tone, Scott declared, I've learned my lesson. On the vacation, my mom and I got into a heated argument. I told them that I would no longer be paying for them. Even today, I'm not speaking with them. Please give me another opportunity. I gave him the divorce papers while shaking my head. Scott, it's too late. This has more to do with respect, trust, and the life I want to lead than it does with your parents. Our desires may differ, and that's acceptable, but I'm at my limit now. Scott nodded after a drawn-out silence, his shoulders lowering in surrender. With a gentle click, he closed the door behind him as he scooped up his luggage and left. The weeks that followed were difficult, but they were also liberating. Thanks to my meticulous documentation and Scott's acceptance of the circumstances, the divorce procedure was completed without incident. I lost myself in my profession, turning to writing and cooking for solace. After everything calmed down, I discovered that I was alone once more, but not in the way I had dreaded. I once again found delight in the small things, like experimenting with new dishes, relaxing on quiet evenings with a good book, and interacting with my followers without feeling obligated to meet anyone's expectations. I had a glass of wine on my balcony one evening and enjoyed the view of the city. I couldn't resist grinning. Although my life hadn't gone as I had hoped, perhaps it had worked out perfectly. Isabella was myself again, a culinary critic, a writer, and most of all, a woman in charge of her own life. "Are you ready to leave yet?" I said as I cast a quick glance around the almost empty room. A sigh came out of my friend. With a hint of relaxation in their voice, they said, "Just waiting on the movers." To be honest, I won't miss you around, and it was a bit much the way you changed the locks, as if I was going to try to break in. The question of why such drastic measures were required had always intrigued me, but it now seemed almost unimportant. Kevin was a reserved man who was constantly worried about what other people thought when we first met. He was the perfect example of a henpecked spouse after being married. I had moved into my new place for a week when Kevin seemed desperate. "It's me. Open up," he asked. I pretended not to see him, reacting to his fear with an act of deceit. "I'm Carol, a 34-year-old who works 4 days a week as a part-time employee. 3 years have passed since Kevin and I exchanged vows. Even if we are childless, I think we may still be happy together. When we first got married, we used to talk about our future goals till the wee hours of the morning. We were both cautious at first, inexperienced in love, but I felt that we genuinely enjoyed one another's presence. One night I said to myself, let's be that couple that grows old together. Yes, that's a good concept. A boy and a girl, maybe 3 children. He concurred, saying that's exactly what I was thinking. Even for someone who wasn't very interested in dating or marriage, these light-hearted conversations were enjoyable. It was a surprise to meet Kevin. We first spoke at a gathering that I went to out of duty rather than excitement. We grew closer as a result of our mutual indifference and the fact that he appeared to be there on similar pretenses. I considered him extremely charming at the time since he was serious, a little reserved, and always kind to me. Then he made an unexpected proposal. "Will you marry me, Carol? My goal is to see you smile." "How come?" "We're not even dating yet. Is that correct?" He firmly accepted his suggestion. His surprise inquiry didn't make me turn away. Rather, it got me thinking about the prospect of spending a lifetime with him. "Yes, I accept if that's okay with you." His happiness was contagious, and I suddenly saw why life occasionally deals us these unanticipated, unfortunate turns. I really thought that marrying Kevin would result in a happy future when he proposed. We married within 2 months of our initial meeting, indicating that we jumped right into marriage. Our trip was a little awkward at times due to our lack of romantic experience, but that just made it more exciting. But after moving in together, approximately a month in, I started to see a clear disconnect between my expectations and our marriage's reality. Kevin once came up to me with a more serious than normal expression. He continued earnestly, "Carol, there's something I need to discuss." When he suggested that I think about giving up my work to become a stay-at-home mom, I was shocked. He had never before voiced any displeasure with my work, so this request came as a surprise and signaled the start of an odd change in his conduct. "Why would you ask that?" I questioned, puzzled by his sudden change. "When you work, it makes me feel unneeded," he confessed. "Did someone suggest that to you?" I asked, trying to understand his sudden insecurity. "No, but at my company, all the other men's wives stay at home. It's just how things are there," he explained. I had been clear from the start of our marriage that I intended to keep working, especially since saving money was crucial for our plans. Kevin's new insistence baffled me. But we agreed I would continue working after we got married, didn't we? I reminded him. I know, but as my wife, I hoped you'd consider my feelings. He responded, his concern more about fitting social norms than our mutual happiness. Why not just pretend I've quit? There's no need for me actually to leave my job, I suggested, expressing my reluctance to give up my career. However, Kevin seemed increasingly worried about how others perceived him. If things don't change, I'll be ridiculed by my colleagues and bosses. I'm supposed to be the head of this household, aren't I? Please just do as I ask, he pressed, unwilling to listen to my reasoning. I can't make such a decision immediately. Let me think about it, I said, needing time to weigh my options. All right, but please decide soon, he urged, his tone urgent. I knew I couldn't let this issue drag on, fearing what might follow if I didn't act decisively. Seeking advice, I turned to my boss, Madison. She had worked as an administrative assistant since high school and had faced a similar situation with a controlling ex-husband, eventually leading to her divorce. Now she was a dedicated single mother and someone I greatly admired. That must have been tough, I mused, considering divorce as I reflected on her strength and resilience. Navigating the early days of our marriage, Kevin and I found ourselves at a complex juncture. It's tricky since we're newlyweds, I pondered, contemplating the implications of quitting my job. I haven't fully thought this through, but leaving my position will make it difficult to find a replacement. I shared my concerns with Madison, my boss, who had become a mentor to me. I don't plan to quit immediately, I explained. I'm looking for a way to keep working if possible. Perhaps we could maintain my current part-time schedule for the time being. Switching to full-time might draw too much attention. That's a wise approach, Madison agreed, supportive of my decision to negotiate with Kevin. If he still objects, we could propose reducing my hours officially to part-time. That sounds like a sensible plan. Remember, you can always count on me for advice. I'm here to support you. Madison reassured me, offering a lifeline in the turbulent sea of my marital issues. Thank you, I appreciate your support, I replied, grateful for her guidance. Our conversation deepened, and I discovered that Madison's ex-husband had also changed drastically after their marriage, a situation eerily similar to mine. This revelation was eye-opening. I hadn't considered that some men might transform so completely after marriage, becoming almost unrecognizable from the person they once were. Viewing my circumstances through this lens, I wondered if I had been misled. Despite numerous discussions, Kevin and I were at an impasse. Isn't it a woman's role after marriage to support her husband and manage the household? He argued, clinging to outdated norms. What era are you living in? Nowadays, it's common for both spouses to work, I countered, shocked by his archaic views. Maybe for other couples, but we're different. You see that, don't you? He tried to persuade me. I understand where you're coming from, but I can't agree with it. I stood my ground, asking him to consider my perspective. Kevin persisted daily, pressuring me to quit my job. Despite his efforts, they fell short. I consulted with Madison and decided to resign officially. However, in reality, I continued working part-time 4 days a week. Thankfully, Madison was sympathetic to my situation and agreed to reduce my hours. I've resigned from my job at the company, just as you wanted, I told Kevin. Really? Thank you. Now I can feel more secure about my position at work, he responded, relieved yet oblivious to the truth. By then, it was clear Kevin was primarily concerned with how others perceived him. His abrupt transformation left me bewildered. I chose to deceive him, continuing to work secretly in hopes of preserving our relationship and my independence. But I soon realized that my hopes for a fresh start were misplaced. Despite our new beginning, Kevin continued to exert his dominance and vent his frustrations on me. One day, he sprung a sudden request on me. "A junior colleague is coming over today. I need you to host," he said abruptly. I had no idea. I responded, caught off guard. "Sorry, it was a last-minute decision. Just keep it simple, please," he instructed. Determined to fulfill the request, I prepared drinks and snacks for the guests. However, when Kevin arrived, he was displeased. "Didn't I ask you to prepare for today?" he chided. "You mentioned just keeping it basic, and you took that literally. This reflects poorly on me. I need you to fulfill your role as a wife properly." "What exactly does that mean?" I did my best. "Is there an issue with what I prepared?" I asked, genuinely confused by his dissatisfaction. "No, not really," he muttered, his expression unreadable, a stark contrast to the person I once knew. From then on, Kevin began inviting guests over almost every week. While he reveled in the social gatherings, he expected me to be on standby, prepared for anything. It seemed he was trying to impress everyone with his capabilities as a husband. "Kevin, having guests over every week seems excessive," I ventured one day. "No, it's fine. Everyone enjoys it, and you should support my decisions. It's your duty as my wife." But maintaining such a lifestyle was also expensive. "How exactly am I supposed to manage it?" I asked. "Oh, stop complaining." He would dismiss any question I had as nagging and avoided giving a direct answer. Every morning, I woke up early to prepare meals, make lunch sandwiches, and see Kevin off, all while keeping his suit ready for the day. On days I worked part-time, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., there was barely any time to rest. Despite the business, I cherished my job. Working often felt like a welcome respite. "Carol, you seem tired lately. Are you okay?" My coworker Deborah asked one day, noticing my fatigue. "Yeah, a bit actually," I admitted. "Let me know if there's anything I can do. I'm here to help in any way I can." "Thank you, Deborah. You've been such a reliable support, unlike Kevin." Deborah understood the deterioration in how I was being treated. She was aware of my secret part-time job and had kept it hidden from Kevin. "I appreciate everything, Deborah," I expressed my gratitude. "Bill mentioned it, but I never imagined Kevin would behave like this," she confessed. "Neither did I. I've tried talking to him, but he won't listen, and we hardly have a meaningful conversation anymore." "I'm sorry. If only I were stronger." I sighed, feeling overwhelmed. "Don't be too hard on yourself. You're managing work and household tasks admirably. I appreciate all your help." "I'm glad to hear that," I replied, grateful for her kindness. Living with Deborah's support had been nothing but a positive experience for me, a stark contrast to the strain at home. However, Kevin seemed uncomfortable with how close Deborah and I had become. This discomfort led him to make a shocking and sudden decision. "Where's Deborah?" "Mom's gone," I questioned, puzzled by her absence. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, my confusion growing. "Mom's getting older, and I thought it would be best for her to be in a facility," he replied nonchalantly. "You actually placed her in a home?" My voice cracked, barely hiding my disbelief. "Yeah, just finished settling her into the new place. Now I have the house to myself," he stated as if he had just completed a routine chore. I was at my parents' home when this happened, and the fact that he unilaterally decided to place his mother in a facility shocked me. She was older, yes, but not to the extent that she required full-time care. It became clear to me that he had sent Deborah away to have the house to himself. When I visited Deborah at the facility, she looked surprised yet resigned. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," I apologized. No, it's not your fault, Deborah reassured me. I never expected him to go to such lengths. I'm afraid of what he might do if I resist. I'll miss you, but I'll manage. If you need anything, you're always welcome here, she added, trying to offer some comfort. Thank you, I replied, feeling the weight of the situation. Afterward, we moved from our previous home into my in-laws' house. Despite managing the household diligently, Kevin never acknowledged my efforts or showed any gratitude. The idea of having children, once a topic of eager discussion, now seemed completely out of reach. Kevin often disregarded me, preferring to spend his time away from home. Additionally, he began imposing arbitrary rules. No matter how late he returned, I was required to stay awake until his arrival. If I happened to wake up later than him in the morning, he would become upset. "What time will you be home today?" I asked one evening. "I'm not sure. Just stay up until I get back, okay?" he instructed. One day, after a similar exchange, when Kevin returned home, I noticed something unusual. As I took his suit to hang it up, the air was fragrant, a sweet feminine scent that was unfamiliar to me, as I didn't wear perfume. It was unmistakable evidence of an affair. Whenever he came home late, I would catch whiffs of the same perfume. That day, he unusually suggested I go to bed before him, raising my suspicions even further. Quietly, I went to the living room and overheard their conversation. "Oh, she's clueless." "When are you going to leave her?" a woman's voice asked. "I'll kick her out soon enough," Kevin's voice responded. Clearly, their voices carried easily, especially the woman's, which was quite loud. From their discussion, it was evident that their relationship had been ongoing for some time. While the incident with the perfume didn't shock me, it left me feeling utterly disgusted. Kevin was still technically my husband, and despite my hopes for a turnaround, his treatment of me remained harsh and unchanging. As we approached the 3-year mark of our marriage, he sprung another surprise. "I have a business trip the day after tomorrow. I need you to get everything ready," he announced abruptly. "That's very short notice," I replied, the timing and suddenness raising my suspicions. "I'll be away for about 4 days. Please make sure my clothes are prepared." I couldn't help but suspect his claim of a business trip was a cover for time spent with his mistress. I remembered a conversation with a colleague's wife at a company gathering who had warned me, "Be cautious if he suddenly mentions a business trip. Our company doesn't even have those." Her words echoed in my mind as I pieced things together. My suspicions had been confirmed earlier when I found a chat on his mobile phone, accidentally left in the living room, detailing how he had taken paid leave for this so-called trip. This discovery marked a turning point for me and signaled the beginning of the end of our marriage. Armed with proof of his affair, I prepared to confront him with divorce papers upon his return. However, it was Kevin who made the first move. "Are you ready to leave? The movers will be here soon," he said coldly as soon as he returned home. "I need you to be gone before I get back," he demanded. "Why are you saying this all of a sudden?" I countered, shocked by his blunt directive. "You can't spring this on me and expect me to leave immediately." "Then I'll wait a bit, but start preparing to leave," he replied, dismissing my objections. "Goodbye." I never imagined that my once timid, overly concerned husband would transform into such a domineering partner, but this was the final straw. The future I once envisioned with him now felt like a distant memory. Living with such a man, I couldn't envision a bright future ahead. What comes next? I wondered aloud. This could get interesting. Has the mover arrived yet? "No need to rush. They should be here soon," came the reply. "Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, I'm changing the locks on the house," he added almost casually. "All right, got it. I responded, my heart sinking. The thought of not having to see your face again is a relief, were his parting words. After nearly 3 years of marriage, convinced our relationship was irreversibly over, I swiftly left the premises. Soon after, I instructed my lawyer to file for divorce. Despite our circumstances, my husband boldly posted pictures with his mistress on social media, an act of brazen audacity. How could he be so reckless, not realizing he was providing even more evidence of his affair? Even our mutual friends noticed his strange behavior, marking the public unraveling of what we once shared. After leaving my in-laws' home, I transitioned back to full-time work and moved into a high-rise apartment in the suburbs, a place I had long dreamed of living. The apartment was spacious, ideal for one, and felt wonderfully liberating without Kevin's presence. About a month after settling in, I was jolted one morning by the doorbell. Peering through the monitor, I was stunned to see Kevin standing outside. "Hey, it's me, Kevin." "Open up, Carol," he called out, his voice presumptuous and demanding. His sudden appearance and the entitlement in his tone were beyond my comprehension. Deciding to feign ignorance, I thought it might be more amusing than outright rejecting him. Who are you?" "I'm sorry, but I don't know you," I responded through the intercom. "Don't tell me you've forgotten your husband's face." "I'm not married. I think you've mistaken me for someone else." I continued watching as desperation seemed to wash over him, his face a shadow of the timid man I once knew. "Please just listen. I've been deceived and I need Carol's help," he pleaded. "I'm sorry, but I'm not obligated to assist you. If you persist, I'll have to call the police." "Seriously, after all, I don't know you," I retorted, steadfast in my resolve to treat him as a stranger. Kevin must have thought I would always be there to solve his problems, but I was no longer the person who tolerated such dependency. Yet he remained stubborn, unwilling to relent. "That's it. You made this mess, so it's up to you to fix it." "You don't have to be so tough on me," he whimpered. "Oh, and by the way, you can't stay at your parents' place anymore," he added abruptly. "What do you mean? Do you know whose name the house is under?" I questioned, surprised by his statement. "No, but it used to belong to Deborah." "No, it's in my name," I explained, revealing a significant change he was unaware of. Kevin had insisted I leave when I confided in Deborah, which visibly upset and disappointed her. "I can't believe my son has turned out like this. I'm truly sorry, especially after all the help you've given us," Deborah had said during one of our conversations. "Deborah, you're divorcing Kevin, aren't you?" she had asked. "Yes, it's for the best," I confirmed. "In that case, I'll transfer the house to you," she offered, making a decision that took both me and presumably Kevin by surprise.
My name is Freya, and I'm about to turn 25 this year. I've been happily married for 4 years, and my son, William, just celebrated his 4th birthday. When I first got married, I worked full-time, but now I balance part-time work at the same company. My husband, Henry, is 27 years older than me. Our relationship started with Henry being the one to pursue me passionately, but after we got married, I noticed a shift in his attitude, where he became more controlling. Henry has a sister, Aria, who is 23 years old. There's a bit of an age gap between them, and it seems that Henry tends to spoil her a little. Before we got married, I didn't mind Aria visiting often. I thought it was just a normal sibling bond, and I assumed they got along well. But after we tied the knot, I started noticing some changes in Aria's behavior. She began showing up at our place without calling first, expecting to be treated like a guest without ever offering to help or show any appreciation. What bothered me more was Freya's response. Instead of addressing the situation with Aria, he would expect me to accommodate her every time. Aria would come in, barely acknowledging me, and just casually say to Henry, "Hey, I'm here again," like it was completely normal. Even though I wasn't prepared to host another guest, I ended up serving dinner to her. Henry, instead of understanding the situation, would blame me out loud, saying I should have been more considerate. Arya would apologize, but it was clear she enjoyed Henry's favoritism. After dinner, while Henry and Arya sat chatting on the sofa, I was left with the leftovers. I had to make my own meal, and they didn't even acknowledge me or William. It felt like we were just there to serve them, not treated as family. One evening, as I was about to take a bath with William, Henry loudly interrupted, asking me to go buy a cake for Arya, even though it was already late. Arya insisted she wanted it right away, and Henry blamed me for the delay. Feeling pressured, I reluctantly agreed to go to the cake shop with William. As we walked, I overheard them criticizing me, calling me inconsiderate, and questioning why Henry even married me. Although William didn't understand the conversation, he could feel the tension between Henry and me. Trying to keep things light, I asked him what kind of cake he wanted, and he happily responded that he wanted one with lots of fruit. Our trip to the cake shop was full of cake talk, which for a moment helped me forget about the negative things Henry had said earlier. We made it to the shop just before closing time and managed to find the cake Arya wanted. We also bought the fruit cake that William had asked for. When we got home, I served the cakes to Henry and Arya, and then I made William's cake and took it to the dining room. The moment I placed his cake in front of him, Arya pointed at it and said she wanted that one. Before I could say anything, Henry moved William's cake in front of Arya, ignoring William's protests. Henry justified his action by saying he had paid for the cakes with his own money, so he had the right to choose for William. I couldn't hold my feelings in anymore. I told Henry how unfair it was, and in response, he threatened divorce. William, who had stopped crying, nervously grabbed my hand. After a moment, he said, "Mom, I also like cake with strawberries on it." It's really good, as he ate the cake Arya had wanted. Seeing that William was going through so much, I decided to take him away from the situation. I moved him to another room, so he could enjoy his cake peacefully. Henry apologized to Arya, saying he was sorry for being so stingy, but I held back, not wanting to argue in front of William. Watching William enjoy his cake, so happy and innocent, brought me some comfort. After we finished the cakes, we decided to take a late bath and sleep in William's bed. The next morning, when I was preparing breakfast, I realized Arya had already left. But soon, I heard William crying. To my shock, I found that his piggy bank, a gift from my father, had been broken and all the money he had saved was gone. William, who always said goodnight to his piggy bank, was heartbroken. When I asked Henry about it, he casually explained that Arya needed some money, so she had taken it from the piggy bank. Holding my crying, shaking son, I felt his pain so deeply that I couldn't help but cry with him. It hurt to see how much Henry was focused on taking care of his sister, Arya, over our own son. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I was angry and sad, so I confronted Henry, breaking my usual habit of staying silent during arguments, especially in front of William. Without saying a word, Henry walked into the bedroom and returned holding something shocking: divorce papers. I was stunned to find that Henry had been secretly hiding divorce papers, something I had no idea about. In an outburst, he shoved the papers at me and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. William, who had never cried about the issues between Henry and Arya before, seemed to have reached his breaking point. He cried non-stop since last night, and it broke my heart to see him like this. Feeling the weight of the situation, I suggested that we skip daycare for the day. To my surprise, William happily agreed, with a faint smile on his face. We spent the day together playing and bonding. William brought a picture book from the shelf, climbed onto my lap, and happily pointed to the teacher in the book, saying, "Mama, right? He looks like an angel." His little heart seemed full of patience, and in that moment, I decided to make the day special. I took a day off from work, despite the possible trouble it might cause at my job. My workplace understood the situation and kindly granted me the day off. We spent the morning at the park, playing hide and seek, having fun in the sandbox, and sliding down the slides. When we got back home for lunch, William looked sleepy. Normally, he would nap on his own, but today he fell asleep in my lap, just like when he was a baby. I had planned to use the time to do some household chores, but today felt different. Instead of cleaning, I decided to enjoy the peaceful moment and let myself be healed by the sight of William's calm, sleeping face and gentle breathing. Just as I was settling into this serene moment, I heard a noise from the front entrance. The door had opened, and since it wasn't the usual time for Henry to come home, I became suspicious. I quickly hid in the bedroom closet, holding William tightly. A voice echoed through the house, and to my surprise, it was Arya. I listened as she moved through the house, sounding frustrated as she searched for something. After a while, she made a phone call, mentioning Henry and talking about their failed search. I could hear her locking the front door as she left. Once I felt it was safe, I put William back to bed and sat down to think about what had just happened. I couldn't understand why Arya had entered our house, or what they had been looking for. Suddenly, Henry felt like a stranger to me, and I was filled with disgust and fear. Quickly, I packed some essentials for William and me and headed to the train station. We took a train to my parents' house, which was thankfully just 2 stations away. Although I hadn't contacted them beforehand, they could tell something was wrong just by looking at my face. They welcomed us without asking questions. Once we were settled, I told my parents everything about Henry, Arya, and the strange things that had been happening. I explained how I didn't feel safe staying at our house anymore. My mother suggested that Arya might have been searching for my belongings, possibly cash cards. As I thought about it, I recalled my past experience as a successful CEO in the handmade goods industry. When I got married, I handed over the business to trusted friends so I could focus on raising my child. Though I still worked part-time and kept in touch with the company, Henry had no idea that I was still the CEO. I remembered the divorce papers Henry had hidden, and I began to suspect that he thought I had a decent amount of savings. Although I had told him that I still received some money from the company, I had kept the details of my savings and my role as CEO private. Over time, I realized that Henry struggles with managing money and tends to spend all that he earns. Early in our marriage, Henry only gave me $200 a month for food, and even suggested that I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. But with the financial strain of raising William and barely having enough for food, I never agreed to stay home. Eventually, Henry reluctantly allowed me to work part-time. To keep him from asking for more money, I signed a post-marital property waiver through a lawyer, and since William was born, I've used my savings to cover his nursery fees and buy him clothes. Even though I only received $200 for food, I never asked Henry for more money. He must have assumed I had savings, especially considering Arya's apparent need for money. I also thought they might have been looking for my cash cards. I have a separate savings account for William, into which a portion of my salary is deposited every month. But I always carry my valuables with me, so they won't find anything if they were searching for it. What was even more troubling was the idea that Arya might be coming into our house when we weren't there, and Henry might be letting her. My father suggested that I store my valuables, including the cash cards, in their safe for now. As I thought about their need for money, William came over to my father, crying over his broken piggy bank and the promise he had made to save money. My father, furious about what had happened to William's piggy bank, vowed to call Henry. My mother suggested that I try to figure out what Henry and Arya were after. She pointed out that Henry might try to shift the blame to us, making the divorce more favorable for him. I decided to act calmly and find out what their true intentions were. I planned to secretly record their conversation. My father's lawyer friend also offered to help. When we returned home, I started cooking dinner while keeping my phone screen down, ready to record. It wasn't long before Henry arrived home, and to my surprise, he immediately asked about my cash cards. When I asked him about it, he gave vague answers, clearly trying to deceive me. When I remained silent, Henry grew more agitated. He demanded that I give him all of my part-time earnings for his sister. I refused and calmly explained that the money was for William's savings. In response, Henry angrily shoved the signed divorce papers toward me, declaring that I was living off his money and didn't need to save for William. He even said something that made my heart drop. He valued Arya more than our own son. Hearing this, I couldn't continue preparing the meal. I stopped, put the divorce papers in my bag, took William's hand, and walked toward the door. Henry shouted loudly, stating his serious intent for the divorce and ordering me never to come back. I responded firmly, telling him I wouldn't return to a house where a stranger could come and go freely. Once we left, Henry bombarded me with messages and calls, which I ignored. I turned off my phone and sought refuge at my parents' house. I shared the recording of our conversation and the divorce papers with them. Although I had no love or affection left for Henry, I couldn't stop worrying about how this would affect William. My parents understood my concerns and advised me to do what I felt was best. They acknowledged that a divorce could be emotionally hard on William, but they also supported my decision. As I was grappling with the decision, William told me he was hungry. My mother, seeing the distress on my face, kindly made hamburgers, his favorite dish. Overcome with emotions, tears welled up in my eyes as my mother lovingly told William that the hamburgers were made so that he and I could visit her whenever we wanted. William eagerly took a bite and joyfully exclaimed, "Gran's hamburgers. I want to eat these every day." I smiled and said, "It's because the hamburgers are filled with the love I have for you." Then, in a sweet gesture, William took a big bite of his hamburger and offered it to me. His kindness broke me, and even though I tried to stop my tears, they kept flowing. Noticing my tears, my father reassured William that they were tears of happiness, not sadness. William, in a moment of understanding, hugged me, and my father's eyes turned bright red. I realized how blessed we were to be together as a family. I looked at William and remarked, "Family is precious." Surprised, William asked, "Did Dad say that only Arya is family?" My father gently confirmed it but then asked, "Would you like to live with us as family?" With a joyful laugh, William eagerly agreed, which made everyone smile. Despite still grappling with the idea of divorce, the meal was so warm and filled with love that I finally decided to part ways with Henry. I planned to tell William about it, even though my heart felt heavy. Yet somehow, I sensed that William already understood, even without me saying a word. The situation gradually settled, and William, in his innocence, expressed a desire to live as a family. He even embraced our pet dog, affectionately calling him his younger brother, despite the dog being older than him. His sweet gesture lightened the mood, and it felt like a small moment of joy amidst the turmoil. With my decision made, preparations for the divorce began in earnest. I contacted a lawyer who was a friend of my father's, and together, we started formalizing the contract. The next day, we signed the necessary papers, and while I took in the weight of what was happening, my father and William shared comforting laughter in the other room. They were trying to lift my spirits, but I was still processing everything. As I lay in bed that night, I found myself reminiscing about my childhood, when life was simpler, and I never imagined I'd be facing such a complicated, painful decision. The following day, I checked my smartphone and found over 200 missed calls and messages from Henry. His emotional instability was evident in every message. I felt exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained, and I decided to turn off my phone to avoid hearing more. With the lawyer's help, we explained everything to my parents. We shared how Arya had accumulated a significant amount of debt due to her casino habits and shopping addiction, and how Henry had acted as her guarantor. It was becoming clearer why he had been acting so erratically. They had been planning to use my savings to cover Arya's debts, and it explained so much about his recent behavior. The lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers had already been submitted. Henry was devastated when he realized it was final, and I could hear him sobbing on the other end of the phone. It was strange, his tears didn't move me. After everything that had happened, I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for him. Despite the expectation of disagreements over child support, Henry agreed to sign a pledge to pay $340 every month for William's care. It was an amount that barely covered the essentials, but it was a small victory. Later, I received another call from Henry. His tone was different this time. There was no aggression. Instead, he calmly admitted to having manipulated me financially and explained his complex feelings toward Arya. He acknowledged his mistakes, but said nothing that could change my mind. I firmly stated that I had made my decision and wouldn't reconsider. I could hear his faint sobbing on the other end before he wished me happiness and hung up. I didn't even respond. As the call ended, I stayed strong, feeling a sense of resolve that I hadn't felt in months. I discussed my future plans with my parents. After much thought, I decided to stay with them until William grew up, giving us both the stability we needed. I resumed my role as the company president, something I had put on hold when Henry and I got married. I was determined to rebuild my life, not just for me, but for William as well. As time went on, I learned that Henry and Arya had informed their parents about the divorce and the mounting debts. The news was so shocking that it led to their disownment. For Henry, it was the final straw. His own family turned their back on him, leaving him to deal with the consequences of his actions. Looking back now, I find happiness in being with my family. We have our ups and downs, of course, but we have each other. I've come to realize that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who truly care, who lift you up when you're at your lowest, and who help you see the light at the end of the tunnel. I have William, my parents, and my own strength to carry me forward. In the end, that's what truly matters.